and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers, and rock stars of life. My guest today is all three: an actor, comedian, presenter, writer, and director. She co-created and wrote Smack the Pony, a double Emmy Award-winning comedy show for which she was nominated for Best Female Newcomer at the 1999 British Comedy Awards. She has starred in countless films, television series, comedy shows, and radio programs such as Miranda, Green Wing, I Am Alan Partridge, Rescue Me, Veep, Friday Night Dinner, Clare and the Community, among many, many others. In 2003, she was listed in The Observer as one of the funniest acts in British comedy. This conversation is thanks to New College, Oxford, and she was in the year below me, and I remember her as this effervescent, beautiful, very smiley girl who was always running madly from rehearsal to rehearsal. She never seemed to take a break. She was never one of the students frittering away their days lounging around on the lawn, and I know this for sure because I was one of the loungers. When she appeared as Shazza in all the Bridget Jones films, and I proudly announced to my family that I knew her, for a moment, just a moment, my children thought I was cool. So I have been so looking forward after all this time to talking again to Sally Phillips. Hello, Sally.
Hey, Katie. Thanks for having me. What a lovely introduction. Oh, my word.
Well, you radiated this joy to everybody as we were on our way to lying down on the lawn.
I think I was dressed entirely in clothes from Oxfam at that point. Pyjamas and a lime green miniskirt, too much? And going, oh, sod it. Lucy Cook and I, who are still good friends. Have you interviewed Lucy?
No, I haven't. Not yet.
The zoologist Lucy Cook, she's a fabulous, fabulous person, but she and I were known as the lobotomy twins in the first year.
Well, that's interesting, given you ended up getting a first. So you showed them.
Lucy is a top science communicator now. She's just written a book about feminist biology, explaining that Darwin got it wrong. So, yes, what a lovely thing to hear.
Your childhood was all over the place: Far East, Middle East, Italy, Australia. How did that peripatetic upbringing shape you?
I think enormously. I came back to the UK speaking World Service English. That was a bit of a shock. Came back to the UK thinking Britishness was a certain thing that it certainly wasn't. I felt other, but didn't look it. And I think those are all perfect ingredients to send someone into the performing arts. I mean, in comedy, you find over and over again, people had parents in the army or diplomats or teachers or doctors, people that moved around. So any of these moves put you outside of society, looking in, observing, and that's a great position from which to write comedy. I learnt, I can't do it so much anymore, but I used to be able to fit in incredibly quickly. So observe what the key traits were of a particular group and adopt them quite quickly, which is brilliant for characters and great for theatre comedy. So you can very quickly pick up the 3 or 4 things that a person like that, the signifiers of that type of life. But it's less good for doing deep film work because it took me a long time to know people very, very well.
Right.
Friendships were worrying because I hadn't been in a situation where you'd had to forgive people because you just left.
You weren't there long enough.
They did something wrong, you did something wrong, you just moved on.
That's so interesting.
And I think the thing about speaking other languages, we were very British as a family, so we didn't particularly pick up the languages. We did bits of other languages made it into our vocabulary. I think all of that is very good for flexing the brain. You're slightly different people in different languages, I think. I don't know if you speak any.
French extremely badly.
It's embarrassing how bad my Italian is. I can hardly speak it at all, but I do remember when I was speaking it very well, living in Italy, feeling like an ever so slightly different person. Because language shapes the way you see the world and obviously the concepts that different languages have channel your experience. And so, I mean, it's an enormously enriching thing and I'm very grateful for it. In fact, I sort of struggle a little with the fact that I've got 3 boys growing up in such an ordinary upbringing in a suburban house in London. I've started trying to sort of shake that up a bit. When they were under 5 and I was doing a movie, I'd take them with me and then they start school and it's difficult. But as much as I can, I do take them. So in the pandemic, we all went out to Perth and did How to Please a Woman. the height of the pandemic, which was such a smart move because it was the most isolated city on earth and had hardly any COVID at all. So we had 2 weeks in a hotel. We thought it was going to be like cage fighting. 5 of us go in. Who knows how many we're going to...
And 2 comes out.
It turned out to be one of the more special family times. 2 weeks of imposing, doing jigsaws and colouring and Joe Wicks, and your world shrinks to these 2 rooms. And my son, Ollie, who's got Down syndrome, there was a big hotel opposite that had a massive mural of a beautiful woman on the side. He fell in love with the wall. So he used to moon out the window. Hectic thoughts about this massive brick woman on the other side. It's very funny. But yeah, I'm glad to be able to consciously trying to loosen their roots a little and broaden their worldview, because I think it was such a positive experience.
And when you went to Wickham Abbey, was that a new Sally again? Because that's a school that has amazing academic results and it's not for the faint-hearted.
I don't know. 5 years is a long time, so I can't have hated it the whole time. But my overall feeling was I did not like it one jot.
Okay.
It was a great education, and it probably made me who I was because I used to sit in the toilets and play the flute for 3 hours at a time. I think music and beats, comedy is timing. And when I first started doing comedy, I used to mark up the script as for a piece of music. So I used to do, get louder here and stop there, pause there, which wasn't a very good idea. I wouldn't advise it, but that is how I used to do it to start with. And there were some quite interesting people, but it felt a bit bleak.
And I guess if you've had all that freedom of movement as well, and suddenly you're locked in.
Yeah, we came back to the UK in that time as well. So it felt like my difference was completely gone. So I felt quite different, but we just lived in East Sheen. So it wasn't like we lived in Australia anymore or Italy, or there was any explanation for why I was different. I just lived in East Sheen. I had slightly the wrong clothes. I was the only person who had the regulation pants.
Oh gosh, yes. No, well, I did actually as well when I was at school.
Bad pants were bad. But there was a great selection of unusual people. But I think at the time, and I'm sure it's a lot better, but at the time, Wickham was not a very good place for self-confidence. I know a lot of very smart people who came out of there who have just never felt good enough and are only now confronting it, feeling that there was this higher plane one ought somehow to be existing on and nothing was quite good enough, wasn't very healthy.
No.
We had eccentric, brilliant teachers, a brilliant English teacher who was not quite prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but a little bit had tried. And I had an amazing Italian teacher, Signora Abrar, who loved Dante and just lit up, sort of walked in and was like a lamp. Yeah, so that's why I ended up doing Italian.
Why did you choose New College to do Italian?
Because 2 of my friends were trying there.
Okay.
I'm descended from a long line of chemists who contributed nothing to the sum of human knowledge. Fostered terrible arguments between chemists in different colleges, and they were all at Merton. And my dad had gone to Merton. My dad wanted me to go to Merton, so I didn't.
Well, good food at Merton.
Also, I thought it was going to be a bit difficult. I probably wasn't going to get in. And indeed, I didn't get in to start with. I applied for Italian and French, and Anne Jefferson was just starting. And she had inherited, she said this to me later, 5 public school boys from Eton and Winchester. So they'd all had gap years. But then fortunately, the tutor at Corpus said he wanted me. So then they called me back in and said, you can't do French, but you can come and do Italian if you want. So I did Italian and linguistics.
How would you describe your time at New College?
I mean, it really was one of the best times of my life. I absolutely loved it. I made the best friends of my life, and I'm still in touch with them. We've really impacted on each other's lives. So Jess Search, who is head of the Doc Society, the British Documentary Foundation, and so much more besides, who's been created an algorithm that showed the social impact of documentaries, using Inconvenient Truth as an example, such that philanthropists begin to invest in documentaries to bring about social change. So they do social impact measurement.
Wow.
They won the Oscar for Citizen 4. But one example would be Ping Pong, where they followed a group of veteran ping pong players to the Ping Pong World Championships. And one of the people they followed, a ping pong champion over 80s from Germany, had had a massive stroke and was in a care home. But playing ping pong, somehow she was sort of restored to mental and physical health. And so they commissioned a piece of work, a scientific study about the impact of ping pong on the brain. And using that, then raised money to get a table tennis table in every old person's home in the country. And you'll notice there's quite a lot of ping pong tables out and about in public spaces.
Yes.
And she does. And she's such an inspiration to me in terms of, I did a documentary about Down syndrome screening. And when we hit road bumps, she helped me to fight the BBC over the edit and things like that, and encouraged me to take a step in that direction, broadcasting wise, which has completely changed my life. Damien Timmer is the king of Sunday night telly. Yes, he's the creator of Poldark and Victoria, and he started writing reviews for TV Quick at the age of 16. His view on television, how things are going and what career choices to make have been completely... And we've never really worked together. I did a tiny bit on Vanity Fair that he did, really small 2-episode bit. We don't work together, give each other work, but I have so much respect for him. And Lucy Cook is...
the zoologist.
Favourite zoologist, completely hilarious. Loathed by Attenborough for dumbing down. Dumbing down zoology, which she isn't at all. Person to tell me that female moles had gonads. What's not to love?
Do they?
They do. They have interior gonads. And basically a phallus. And there are many pairs of lesbian albatross. And she's always full of fascinating facts. So that quartet has been such an important part of my life. I love them to bits.
You joined the Oxford Review. When did you realise that acting was your calling?
Well, my dad said, try everything when I went out. And I had done a bit of acting at school, but you had to do music or drama at school. You couldn't do both. So I did music. So I did things like the sixth form musical, which we did West Side Story. I played Anita and really enjoyed that. And in the fifth form, we made up our own plays. I quite enjoyed that. And one of my favourite experiences at school was being in a play directed by Canadian, and not one of us had learnt the lines. Giggling at the back of the stage, just in bits. That extreme joy of being terribly in trouble and there being nothing you can do about it. And so then I got to Oxford and I thought, well, I've just done this musical. I'll audition for Kiss Me Kate. It was on at the Oxford Playhouse. So I did that and I got in. And I was also rowing.
Oh, you were rowing?
Just that.
I rowed for a little bit and that was hard work, actually, but fun.
And there was this sort of clash where New College B novice crew kept winning.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So we weren't expected to win anything. But then I can't remember who we defeated, but I remember we were starting to defeat the A's. And there was this clash where the play were going, well, haven't you got a reserve for the team? And the boat were going, haven't you got an understudy? Fortunately, someone, not me, caught a massive crab and we lost and didn't go through. So that was it. But Jess always recalls me wandering around New College going, look at my muscles, because I grew like incredible biceps. How long did you do it for?
I did it for a year, the first year, and then I coached. And actually, I'm thinking maybe I coached the A's, and that's maybe why they were losing. But
I think I vaguely remember that.
I was not very good at coaching, but I wasn't that great at rowing either. But I did bulk up, which is absolutely not what I wanted to do. I thought that's just too many early mornings.
Too much being starving on a budget.
Yes. Just generally, I wasn't into it enough. So I went back to the lawn and lay down and stayed there. After New College, we had a choice, I think, if I'm right. You were going to do a PhD on the spaghetti western, but you changed your mind and ended up studying drama at the Théâtre de Complicité.
I trained with the guy who trained a lot of the people at Complicité. I'd done the Oxford Review and decided comedy was definitely not for me because it was awful. My memories of the Oxford Review are being in a room in Magdalen with 3 boys firing their fingers at me and me having to die and them going, you're no good at that. Me eventually having a fit and going, listen, there's loads of things I can do. I can do an impression of Princess Leia. I can do a cartwheel. I can't remember what else I said. I think I should be doing more in the show than just going to the shop to get you drinks and dying. And so they put their speech straight into the Oxford Review. But anyway, I thought that's just really not for me. That's sort of grossy. But yes. So then I came out and I trained with Philippe Gaulier. He's so rude to you and he's so sparing with praise that it can be pretty bruising, but it really is a good start in the industry, I think, because the industry is pretty bruising. I started working for a sub-Théâtre de Complicité company, started by Kate Brooke, who was at Christchurch a few years above me. And we would do adaptations, physical theatre adaptations of French A-level texts and tour the country, go to theatres and hope that people would come and see them. And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. So I would be touring around in the back of the van that would blow carbon monoxide back in, with no windows in the back with the set. And we'd arrive somewhere, unpack, do the show to not very many people. We were on 50 quid a week and then come back. So one of them we did was the last few nights of Guy de Maupassant. And we were characters from his short stories come back to torment him for his treatment of women. And I played a prostitute called Mouche, who also died of syphilis in the show. And it was very good. So we ended up at the Edinburgh Festival doing this one side of town. But there were loads of comics up that I semi-knew from Oxford. And one of them, Richard Herring, asked me to go over and be in his one-man show, which obviously had 5 people in it, called Ra Ra Rasputin, a comedy biography of Rasputin the monk, set to the words and lyrics of Boney M. So I'd do this, I'd die of syphilis and jump and cartwheel to my heart's content, speak some French and try and be charming on one side of town. And then I'd run across town, put on a boob tube and flares and play Damien.
Oh my God.
Damien from The Omen.
Yes.
Alexandrovich. And sing Ma Baker and dance a bit. And no one would come and see me dying of syphilis, but we sold out every night, Ra Ra Rasputin. And I found it hard to get an agent, but doing comedy, I found it easy to get an agent and easy to get that work. So I just sort of ended up doing that. So
that's how it happened.
I slowly came to realise that I wanted to play Juliet, but when I played Juliet, when I died, the audience would go, oh, bless, she isn't quite right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, I always say I was an everything a pound shop Juliet. You know how everything a pound shops have the same thing as a normal shop, but it's just slightly shitter. So a normal shop might have Barbie with moving arms and legs and changes of clothes, a head that can move from side to side. But the everything a pound shop has Barbara, who can't move anything but a nylon jumpsuit and maybe unmanageable hair or ginger hair with a fringe. That kind of thing. So I realised that was where I was supposed to be. And I could naturally do it, not always in the way I wanted to. I always wanted to say the funny thing, but basically I just was ridiculous. That was it. I was ridiculous. And even though I've got my first.
Not even though, as well as.
Well, that sort of made me more ridiculous in a way. Made me more ridiculous. The fact that I was insisting I was clever, yet I was just so dumb, so stupid. On stage, my energy was so, and remains, so very stupid. It's one of those paradoxes.
Ingrid Oliver, she was at New College and I had a conversation with her a while back and she felt that you can't teach comedy. There is the timing, the lightness of touch. There is something very unteachable about it. You either have it or you don't. I don't know whether you would agree with that.
I disagree with her. I think it can be taught. I'm nervous of going in to explain why, because whenever you talk about technique, you sound awful, but maybe I'll have a go. In the old traditions, there's 2 or more types of comedy, but let's just talk about 2. There's clown and bouffon. So bouffon is more like satire. So it's thank you for putting me in the ghetto, that kind of that thing. And clowning is vulnerable, undefended, Paddington type thing.
Yes.
I think the second one is about allowing people to see that you're ridiculous or allowing yourself to be suspended in space undefended for people to just laugh at you. And that point where you don't know why they're laughing. So I think that happens to everyone and everyone can be funny in that way, but most people don't want to be because why would you? Most people want to be a bit defended and private about their most vulnerable
Yes.
bits or the para-ridiculous contradictions in themselves. Was one exercise Philippe did in the clown month where he had 4 of you sat on a bench and a video camera there, and he basically humiliated the first person. So he talked to the first person and really humiliated them in an everyday kind of way, because he's always everyday. He's always sort of rude. And we assumed that he was filming the person he was talking to, but actually he was filming the 3 people waiting on the bench.
Oh.
And when he played it back, it was just so funny because they were all these unguarded, very human emotions going across their faces, being so pleased it wasn't them.
Yes.
That was being humiliated, yet feeling quite sorry for the person, yet also delighted the person was failing. And those sort of lower, simpler, that sort of honesty, it was very, very, very funny. And I think we're all funny like that.
Yes, we are. We all are. But some disguise it better than others.
Yeah, we're all ridiculous. And weirdly, comedians try to hide it more because they try to own it with the jokes by telling jokes, trying to go, oh yeah, no, I'm in charge of this. And there is the thing people say that once comedians know why they're funny, they're no longer funny anymore.
Oh, that's so interesting. When you started working, wasn't one of the early things that you did with Alas, Smith and Jones?
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find it. I think there was a story attached to it. So what were you doing with them?
My first television appearance, I'd been doing comedy open spots and, doing lots of live work. But my first actual job was on Alas, Smith and Jones. And that was a big deal.
Massive deal. Oh my gosh, we would watch it religiously every week.
Yes, and I had friends who were, Ben Miller from Cambridge was writing for them, and it just felt very exciting. And obviously I'd grown up with Not the 9 o'clock news. So the job that came in was, I was in 2 sketches, and the first one I was in bed with Mel Smith, and it started on him, and he was going, I'm terribly sorry, love. This has never happened to me before. It must have been the dream. And he hand over to me covered in vomit. They said, we do need a comedian because you need a good deadpan. They covered me in vegetable soup.
Oh.
Which I had a slight reaction to.
Oh, did you?
I did, yeah. And the other one was a couple are rolling around on a bed in underwear. They reach for a condom and it's no longer on the side table because Mel and Griff, as the borrowers, have taken it. And so I remember being absolutely thrilled with this. I got 800 quid. One of the things I think was really confusing was that, I mean, I am biased, but I thought the women at New College were amazing. We were 1 in 3, weren't we? So we were outnumbered 2 to 1. My maths is bad. Is that correct?
Well,
3 to 1.
1 in 3, 3 to 1. Yeah, but remember, I did really badly with maths. I did read maths, but I got a very low grade. So I'm not going to get any further than you.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is that's the Medvale School for the Gifted. But anyway, there were 3 to 1. And the women were just great. There were just so many amazing women all the way through college. And my feeling very much was that we were in charge of all the men we knew, because it's that particular age where the blokes are suddenly in the grip of their hormones and you have all the power, don't you?
So you do.
So we were smart, we were young, we were relatively attractive, we were in charge. I remember sort of realising that I was oppressed. And that was amazingly empowering.
Yes. We were in demand.
Absolutely.
Just by the virtue of numbers.
Exactly. And then I went into comedy, which was an incredibly sexist industry and is still not good. And women weren't thought to be funny at all. And also at the height of Lad Mag, that movement where we were suddenly reduced to what we wore or how much flesh we were supposed to show. So one day I was doing a shoot for Loaded and The Face, and I was really worried about Loaded. So I got there and I was in full defence mode, and they had people around on phones going, I don't think Henry's going to be in the building, Henry being, she's not going to do a bikini shot. And eventually doing a shoot in as covered up as I could possibly be, even with sunglasses, with a big fake fur coat up to my ears and down to the floor, and then a wind machine and just looking a bit crazy. And then coming out and going, phew, that's that done. And then going down to the face with my defences down, not expecting that there, and ending up doing a shoot where I didn't realise you could see completely through the shirt they put me in while I was playing snooker.
Oh, that's not fair.
So, yeah, lots of that. And going for auditions and then going, she was great, but can she come back more attractive? Going, what? Do you mean? What? Sorry, that was my best. That was my best. What do you mean? And my agent go, I think they mean sort of shorter skirt and can you come wearing less?
Well, would you get away with that now? There was a level of acceptance or not questioning that when we were growing up.
Yeah, we didn't have a sense of humour if we kicked back against that in any way.
Yeah, you had to just go along with it and laugh along. And it's only now that I look back and think, no, that really wasn't right. But at the time, you didn't question it in any way. But do you think that still happens now?
Like, I think Me Too has helped. It has helped. And we have things like intimacy coordinators now. Have you heard about those?
No.
They're quite fun.
That's an interesting job to have.
I'm thrilled with intimacy coordinators. So when you're doing a sex scene now on movies, they will have an intimacy coordinator. So you structure the whole thing and make it as unsexual as possible. So it's as... Because you can imagine there's nothing worse than someone going, okay, we're shooting a sex scene, off you go.
Yeah, well,
and they often put it first in the shoot. So it's your first day, go, hi, nice to meet you. And you're naked. It is like Love Actually. I mean, that's why Richard did that, I think. And so now, the film I did in Australia, there was plenty of sex scenes. I only had one with a vibrator, but observe.
I was very impressed.
Thanks. Thank you. What was great about that was our intimacy coordinator said, be an animal. She said this to everyone. And she said to you, I suggest you're a slug. And so I was being a slug. So everyone on set knew I was being a slug. I mean, what is less sexy than a slug? Not much. So it was great. It completely took all the taboo out of it. And it's straight back to drama school where we're all being animals.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great. Really, really good. So there are lots of things that have changed. It's interesting. So I obviously I'm getting on a bit. So I've got friends in the industry who are younger. And Aisling B said to me, you don't see the sexism because it was so much worse when you started. It's gone on to a different level. It used to be just overt. So I remember having Rod Hull looking through the window of the changing room and begging with a first AD not to send me back in a car with an older actor because I was just really worried. Uncomfortable about what was going to happen. And they had a reduced budget, so really having to argue for that kind of thing.
Gosh, Sally, that's awful.
You know about it from Harvey. I mean, fortunately, I'm not beautiful.
You are.
But I'm not Rachel Weisz. I think of the defence strategies she will have had to employ, will have had to be ingenious. But yes, Aisling said the way it's happening now is firstly, progress is incredibly slow. So career advancement's incredibly slow. So it'll take you a lot longer to get your own show. And you'll see although panel shows, they have to have a woman on each panel show now. She says, watch for the edit, because very often they'll cut to the women laughing and the men telling the jokes.
Still?
Yes, so within an edit, a trivial thing, you have to be more funny, Aisling tells me, Roisin Connerty tell me, you have to be funnier on the day to make it to the edit, because you can make something funny by the length of time you stay on it. So quite a slight thing can be funny just because you give it loads of attention. So we're at that level now, which is a lot better, but there's still a way to go.
Going back to you, Alas Smith and Jones, Green Wing, I Am Alan Partridge, Veep, great Finnish accent. Miranda, I'd love to talk about Miranda, the sitcom that you are written and starring Miranda Hart, nominated for several BAFTA awards, and you're Tilly, Miranda's old school friend, tactless but well-intentioned. And this is live. You were performing in front of an audience every week. So that's not like theatre when you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and then you do a run. You're doing a new show every week. Was that terrifying?
Yeah, I don't love live sitcoms, but it does elevate it, I think. That was Miranda's big passion. So she loved Saturday night TV of the 70s and 80s. I remember her running towards me across the studio floor because the stairs, I don't know if you've seen it, but the stairs in the joke shop are actually the stairs from AbFab.
Yes.
The BBC penny pinching had just kept the AbFab stairs in storage and just brought them out and reused them.
I recognise them.
Yes, I mean, repainted and the wall behind wallpaper differently and the rest. But that was her big passion. And there are lots of people who think that you only get that kind of very sharp performance on a live show. Whereas I really like the gaps. I laugh at the gaps, the things people don't say, the things you see them swallow. And I really like things petering out. And I like people not knowing what they're doing or what to say next. And that kind of stuff doesn't work so well live. It was relatively nerve-wracking. It was always such a high when you've done it. And it's also so nice to hear. We were so surprised how much that show was loved. So the queue for people to get in went round the block, and records are always really long because you do each scene twice and never more than twice because the audience can't bear it more than twice. So you've got 2 shots at it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. We're very close, that cast.
It looked like it was great fun.
Oh, good friends. Miranda went to boarding school as well, of course. We had that in common.
Yeah.
She says that she just has to meet a man, and in her head somewhere it goes, oh, nice spring wedding. All girls boarding school. And be completely unable to say goodbye to anyone because goodbye is just awful.
You're the lead in Rescue Me. You're the lead in Sky One's Parents. You're in Friday Night Dinner with Tamsin Greig and Mark Heap. And you're also in Green Wing with them. And it seems like a very small collection of people in that comedy space.
Is it a small world? So getting much bigger, the world. What I do notice is that I know how good people expect a sitcom to be because there is a comedy A crew.
Oh, is there?
So you turn up. Yeah, there's 3 or 4 DOPs, 3 or 4 lighting guys. You go, oh, we're with the A team. Oh, they think this is going to be really good. In recent years, I found I've enjoyed doing films because it works really well with parenting. So if I'm number 5 on the call sheet, numbers 1 and 2 will be in all the time. Number 5, probably do 10 days in 2 months. But it's enough to get your teeth into. It's a character with a beginning, middle, and end. It's usually something to research, which being a girl sport, I really love. So I really love finding out about different worlds. We're making this classic car movie at the moment, so I can't even drive. I've gone around the country interviewing members of different car shows, and I've been to various car shows and found out about various different figures in the car world. And that's been really fascinating. Yeah, so I've been doing that. And I just really love the way that people are really trying their best in film. Even if it's kick, bollock, scramble, is just so much more careful.
And why is it they're more careful in film rather than, say, a TV series?
It's been a long time brewing. I mean, a friend of mine's got a film they've been brewing for 30 years. I've got one passion project I've been trying to get away. It's been 8 years in the making. It takes a long time. By that stage, to not give up, it's something you really, really want to say. And there's all these compromises around budget, and financiers might say, you have to have Olivia Colman, and she might not be right. Or the other way around, you want only Olivia Colman and she's just too busy or thinks it's dreadful. But also the finance is kind of comprehensible. You understand what's going on, whereas with TV at the moment, a lot of it political or strategic in a way that you don't have access to those decisions. Part of the reason this Swedish film has been hard to make is that suddenly all the streamers have got this policy of buying local. So because half of it's in Swedish and half of it's in English, that makes it less desirable to them.
Is this the classic car one that you're doing?
No, this is a different one. It's my passion project, my 8-year one.
Oh, okay.
And when we started, obviously, a foreign language film with some English in it was a good thing. Whereas now a foreign language film that isn't exclusively Scandinavian, it makes it less desirable.
What's it about, Sally?
It's a Down syndrome romantic comedy. So the idea being that we don't really buy romantic comedies anymore because there's no obstacles. People they like each other, they have sex, see if they like that. Move in, see if the other person's bearable. Oh dear, they aren't, that's it. So everyone's hunting for the believable obstacle. Whereas I've got an 18-year-old with Down syndrome. And should I wish to, I can completely prevent him from seeing the girl he wants to see. His girlfriend at the moment in Cornwall, his mum and I are great, great friends. But, if he runs away to Cornwall, he'll get sent straight back. Whereas most 18-year-olds can just hang out with each other. And there's a very dark history of forced sterilisation. It wasn't legal as somebody with learning disability to have sex in Ireland until 2018. And that was presumably law brought in to prevent sexual abuse. But there's a huge amount of control exercised over people with learning disabilities' romantic lives, which is why I'm proud to be a patron of Jack and Jill. No, there are a couple of charities doing great work helping people with learning disabilities to have a rewarding sex life. It's a film where there's a British guy and a Swedish Kurdish girl, and they meet at the Global Down Syndrome Convention in Stockholm and fall desperately in love. And the parents are against for reasons that they find hard to admit to themselves.
That's the brilliant thing about film, is that you can
change things.
Change opinion.
In Ireland, the situation was changed. It was helped a lot, the change in the law, by a film called Sanctuary, which was made by a learning disabled theatre group. So they did the play and then they made the film of it, which is a young man trying to have sex with his girlfriend. And it's a night out and he's cobbled all his change from his job. And their care worker has decided to turn a blind eye. And the two of them go up to this hotel and it ends with him being arrested.
Wow, I haven't seen it.
And it's very funny as well because it's got the rest of the group, it's supposed to be their cinema trip. The rest of the group are in the cinema talking and someone's wandering off in a shopping centre. And it's a great film and very effective. Did the job it came to do.
Well, I was wanting to talk about your documentary because you have forged this glittering career in the most competitive and overcrowded space. But on top of it, you're a single mother. You have 3 sons. You have 4 dogs. Is that right? Do you have 4 dogs as well?
Ollie's carer, 3 of them are hers, but we all live together. So
Ollie has Down syndrome. So I watched your BBC documentary, A World Without Down Syndrome, and you raised that question, what kind of society do we want to live in and who do we think should be allowed to live in it? And with all that you have going on, family-wise, work-wise, what was the tipping point that made you think, I have to make this documentary?
So never intended to. And I had, in fact, had stick from some people in the Down syndrome community about not using my platform. And a company got in touch and they said, we want to make a documentary about the new test. In fact, we've already submitted this documentary to the BBC and had it accepted with you attached.
Wow.
They hadn't consulted me. So I rang Jess and I said, talk to me about this. Is this how it works? And she said, ask to see the treatment. So I asked to see the treatment and there was a bit of umming and ahhing the other end. And in the end, they sent a treatment that was basically, exaggerating for comic effect, but Phillips sobbing tells us the traumas of blah, blah, blah. She introduces to her son, Ollie, who suffers with Down syndrome and all the struggles and heartbreak. And that was completely intolerable.
Yes.
So I rang them up and I was quite cross. And I was like, listen, you can't submit this when I haven't even seen it. And there's no way I would do that. And then they said, well, we'll change it, make it what you want. So we had a meeting and then I decided I didn't trust them. And it was fantastically exposing and there was no way they were coming into my home. But I spoke to the BBC and they're like, well, we are quite interested because there is this new test coming out. And there was a lot of NIPT called non-invasive prenatal testing.
Yeah.
And even that name in itself is kind of loaded because it's drawing a comparison with invasive prenatal testing, which would be amniocentesis, and implying there's a parity between those 2 tests, whereas actually one is diagnostic. So an amniocentesis is diagnostic and will give you a pretty much definite result, whereas NIPT is a screen and will give you a probability.
Okay.
So this test is rolled out everywhere now. It's the first time that big for profit motives have entered into the screening arena. So it's the first time big organizations who can make a lot of money have been involved in
pushing it.
Yes. And so they're pushing it, and they were pushing it in a, frankly, completely immoral way. The marketing, so for example, the NIPT, the names were things like harmony and sort of peacefulness, those kind of names, implying that it was a dreadful worry that you might be carrying a baby with Down syndrome. So it was this sort of unspoken weight behind all of this stuff. And it also wasn't clear when it was marketed that you had to do this test in addition to the existing screens. So it didn't quite make sense to me. Thinking we already have a screening program that delivers, depending on your age, 92%, 93% accuracy. And then you can have an amniocentesis, which will deliver 99% accuracy. You are talking about adding in this test at the cost of £425 per woman, which will deliver 96, 97% accuracy depending on age. It just didn't make financial sense.
No.
And you go, why this much money to eliminate this much, even we shouldn't use the word risk, probability?
Yes.
This improve accuracy this much. Is the threat of having a baby with Down syndrome this awful that it justifies this expenditure? It didn't really make any sense. So there was something to go digging after and some attitudes to unpick there. It posed the question. I hope that what I said was, what exactly is this scary about these people? Let's be honest about it. We are designing, there is eugenics by stealth. We are, just as at the turn of the last century, eugenics was gaining in popularity.
Yes, and here it is again.
Here it is again, and there's a blindness about it because who we grow up to be is not all about our genetics. You know, there's obviously a huge impact, environment and all kinds of things. Yeah, I feel a bit out of date talking about it, a bit rusty. But there was a period where I got fantastically match fit and was talking to Parliament and governments and different organisations. There was an interesting thing when I was on the Today programme. They rang up and they said, tomorrow we're doing a piece about why the government needs to introduce NIPT. Do you want to come on and put the other side of it? And I said, not really, because I hadn't started making the documentary at that point. I said, not really, I don't really know what I'm talking about yet. And they said, well, if you don't come, then your side won't be put. What shall I do? So I asked friends, what do I do? And they said, listen, just go, because it won't be worse than there being no one. And I woke up at 5, terrified. And Today was rolling out this story from 5 over and over again of a mother who had had an amniocentesis because her probability of having a baby with Down syndrome was high. And the baby had miscarried after the amnio and had been discovered to not have Down syndrome after the amnio. So this very distressed mother, who it turned out was married to one of the people who worked on the Today programme, was very angry that this test hadn't been in place because she felt, I think, misunderstanding that it wasn't a diagnostic, it was still just a screen.
Yeah.
And to date, she still would have needed to have an amnio. Wanted to put pressure on the government to do that. There was a whole PR strategy from the manufacturers. So they were training up grassroots people. It's called astroturfing, where they get fake grassroots. So they get a parent of somebody with Down syndrome who had the test, and they'll fly them to America and treat them to all kinds of things and train them to talk positively about the experience of having the test.
Oh my goodness.
And then you'll find that only those people are invited to talk at the midwife conferences. So then the midwives, believing they're getting it from the horse's mouth, believe that this is a very positive thing. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we needed a proper debate. I ended up on the Today programme and terrified because by this stage there'd been 5, or maybe not 5, but certainly 3 repeats of this very traumatic story of this very distressed mother. And I just ended up saying, Michelle Hussein said, are you saying we shouldn't test for Down syndrome? And I just ended up thinking, well, yeah, I mean, maybe not. It's not a death sentence disaster.
Yeah.
And we're told it is. And that prevents us bonding with our children. It causes so much damage. And longitudinal studies show that mothers remember that moment of diagnosis on their deathbed. You remember everything about what happened. You remember every moment. I remember when we were told, the nurse closing the curtains around us. I remember what the doctor looked like exactly. I remember the nurse crying and saying, it's a shame it's happening to a family as nice as yours.
Oh, gosh.
That I'm sorry, that whole thing. And really can get overstated. And I've been criticised for being too unicorns and rainbows about the whole thing. But really, the negative narrative is so fantastically damaging. I think we do need to push back the other way a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the statistics I think that you said was that 9 out of 10 people with a positive Downs diagnosis will terminate. And is that right, that legally they can do that right up to the last minute?
Right up to birth.
Yeah.
Yes, so the figures are quite complex. The test companies hugely exaggerated the dangers of amniocentesis. Dr. Nicolaides at King's College London told me that he only had 1 in about 10,000 fetuses miscarry after an amnio. Lynn Chitty was more like 1 in 500-600, so let's go with her. Because Nicolaides said that when fetuses miscarry after amniocentesis, it tends to be because there is some other thing wrong, maybe not a chromosomal abnormality, but you don't generally get typical fetuses, he argues, miscarrying after amnio. Whereas the figures that the test companies were using were 1 in 100.
Right. Yes. Well, I remember those statistics.
Yeah, I specifically didn't do amnio because I believe this 1 in 100 figure. And so if it's 1 in 500, then the need for the test gets even less.
Yes.
So I think this is my theory, and I'm sure people who listen to this podcast will know the truth. But my theory is the reason they were pushing this test so hard is because it's a DNA screen. It's a point at which you can collect DNA. And so when the point comes, which it won't now because of COVID, really changed the landscape. It's going to be a huge thing for personalised medicine. The value of that market is in the tens of billions. That the governments are sort of wanting to get ahead. And then they could say, when the debate came up and the privacy debate came up, they could say, well, we've been taking your DNA for years.
In the screen.
In the screens. We've actually had it for years. It's not so scary. Because it didn't really make any other sense. But the only problem with that is that it came with a hell of a lot of very negative subtext about what it was to have Down syndrome. And we have found in the hospitals where NIPT has been introduced, the number of live Down syndrome births has gone down by about half. So this matters. This matters partly because I think we lose something when we lose the unique characteristics of people with Down syndrome. Partly it matters because it says a lot about us that we don't value those characteristics. It bodes very ill for our own old age.
Yeah.
We say people are too expensive to look after because we're all going to be disabled if we're lucky enough one day. And it's already 1 in 5. But also for us, just in terms of the community, that's wives and husbands and partners. And it's also research. There's no impetus to research better things that actually help people with Down syndrome, educational strategies, medical interventions. Nearly all the money put aside for medical research into Down syndrome has been devoted to the study of how to identify them in the womb.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is not to their benefit.
No.
And currently, he was born in the first year of the nuchal fold screen, which was discovered by Professor Nicolaides. That was 2003. And he has a relatively decent cohort. His best friend has Down syndrome. His girlfriend has Down syndrome. He plays for Brentford Penguins, the Down syndrome football club. But this population is being completely decimated. So people born with Down syndrome this year won't have those things.
No.
They won't have friends.
A cohort.
They won't have a cohort. And
yeah, that's very sad.
I think it is very sad.
And I think if people don't understand Down syndrome, then what about autism or what about ADHD? Our son was born profoundly deaf. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that if you knew about it that if you start screening, where do you stop?
Yes.
So it's a slippery, unpleasant slope.
There was a film called The Surrogates, which I absolutely hate, which does a debate in dramatic form. The story is there's a gay couple, two gay men. They ask one of their sister to carry an embryo for them. She agrees to be the surrogate. Turns out the embryo has Down syndrome. There's an argument with her mother, who's a lawyer, going, don't do it. It's going to take your whole life. Don't do it. And she says, where do you draw the line? She says, I draw the line at Down syndrome. And that is indeed the line where it is drawn. And it is pretty horrible living on that line because you're constantly being kicked about by the abortion debate. So the pro-lifers use you as an example of how all life is sacred. And the I'm going to say pro-abortion because they're not pro-choice. They're not pro you choosing to continue. They are pro-abortion. Yeah. The pro-abortion people kick you around as well. If you speak out for Down syndrome, you're pro-life and you get pilloried. And it's really aggressive both ways. And
well, it's horrible because it's also one thing you being in the firing line, but it's deeply hurtful when it's your child as well who's being debated and discussed as if he's not a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens over and over and over. The education system, when you do your ECHP, Educational Health and Social Care Plan.
Yeah, we have one.
I've got 3 neurodiverse kids. I wonder how many of us Oxford graduates have neurodiverse kids. How many of us have ADHD?
Yes. I know, it wasn't even tested back then.
ADHD, autism and goodness. That triad is tricky. But anyway, it just does feel like you're haggling for your child, like haggling for a carpet.
Sally, could you just tell us a little bit about what life with Ollie is like?
It's not quite like any other child, but it's just much more. I always think I have an amplified life. So I have more ups, I have more and greater joy, for sure. And he manages to infuse the most mundane of situations with great joy. So, Ollie, there's pizza. No way! And at the same time, he's fantastically stubborn. He just is the mountain that will not move.
Yes.
He's frustrating, but really it's richer. My life is much richer. I've met so many people I'd never have met. I've been forced, especially as someone who fancied themselves as clever, been forced to confront all kinds of biases I had and recognise all kinds of intelligences I was unaware of. It's been wonderful. It's been difficult, but wonderful.
Yes.
Like going to new college.
Yeah.
Parenting could have been quite boring. Yeah. I had to learn sign language. I had to read about neurology. I had to study educational strategies. I had to do the Handel course. I had to do scientific experiments. It was fascinating. And we had boundaries down, walls down. Ollie, I used to often tell the story, but I had absolutely no desire to meet my neighbours at all. None. Ollie discovered some twins had moved in at the end of the garden. And the Down syndrome handbook says that they won't be able to climb, but Ollie can climb. So Ollie would climb over the fence and just sit in their garden in his pants. And it would be so embarrassing. I'd wake up, the back door would be open and like screaming, where are you, Ollie, Ollie? And he'd be sat there and they'd have to feed him over. And eventually, after a few years, we ended up with ladders going over the
that's so great.
And all kids going to and from quite freely. And they used our paddling pool and their kids have grown up and our kids have grown up and they've grown up differently. But there was just a beautiful few years there where he made me live in community, which would be something that I would have said I wanted to do, but in reality had no desire to do whatsoever.
Yes.
My life is richer for it.
We're going to go back to your career. I promise I'll speed up.
No worries. It's lovely to talk to you. I've got 2 kids with ADHD as well. So I've got Down syndrome and autism and 2 ADHD and dyslexias. And that to me feels a bit cruel because I love reading so much and no one will open a book. And I love art galleries so much and nobody can stand still for 2 seconds to look at a painting. So those gaps can be quite painful, but I guess that's where you learn new things or stretch yourself or whatever. Both of you.
You do need higher energy levels to stay strong. And is there anything that you do on a daily basis?
Yes, we're fetishizing daily routines at the moment in the UK, aren't we? Yes, I do. Of course I do.
No. What
Of
is
course
it?
I do. Yeah, I do the artist way. Have you ever done that?
No. What's that?
It's an American writer, Julia Cameron, about 20, 30 years ago, developed this program for unblocking writers or artists of all kinds. And you may find it intolerable, but it works. It's a 10-week course and there's lots of exercises you do. But the two basic practices that I do on and off, but most of the time, are every day when I get up, I write 3 pages of just whatever, stream of consciousness, whatever, but with a spirited play. It's not a journal, it's not a diary. It can be as boring as, oh, I need to get that paperwork in. I fancy a banana smoothie. It can be as boring as that. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes a whole short story will fall out. And then once a week, you go on a date with yourself, doing something that will just make you glad. So maybe that's a walk with the dogs. Maybe you're deciding to make sushi rolls with a picture of a panda inside. Maybe it's going to see an art exhibition or, I don't know, all kinds of things like that. And so one is to run the tap. You imagine being in a place with rusty taps, you sort of run the rust off the taps. And the other is to sort of restock your imaginative pool. So I do that most of the time. And I do meditate 20 minutes a day.
Okay.
/ pray. I think pray, but don't say anything.
Yes.
So no words, silence, but in a Christian direction.
Yeah, that's fantastic meditation.
Yeah. And obviously there are times when you can't do that. But in my head, I try and fit those things in if I can.
Okay, that's great advice. I'm going to try that.
I recommend it.
Bridget Jones.
Yes.
Series that, my friends and I have all agreed we'd most like to have been in because it just looked so much fun. It was hilarious, sublime, doesn't get any better than that. How was it for you?
Heavenly. The first one, I was just turning 30. I was actually living in Notting Hill, having a lifestyle not 1,000 miles away from Bridget, though at the time I was very offended if anyone said that. I was like, I'm nothing like her. But looking back, I can see that I was quite like her. And Sharon Maguire, who directed the first one and the third one, was one of Helen Fielding's close mates and just one of the most glorious humans alive. So she's Jude in the book, but her real life name is Sharon Maguire.
Okay.
She's a very, very funny and Irish and just completely charming. She's like an elf. And she was really overexcited and had gone out and spent nearly all her director's fee on DKNY filming gear. Openly fancied the pants off both Hugh and Colin and just simply... So she was glorious and remains a friend. And I think the friends in all those early Richard Curtis movies always have the best time because you're just in a clot, you're a Greek chorus.
Yes.
And James Callis, one of the funniest human beings alive. And he was young and excited and starting to direct and full of plans and weed. Shirley is one of the great Scottish actresses, Shirley Henderson. I remember her walking around Notting Hill going, I can't believe people live like this. Me sort of blushing.
Oh, do they?
As we saw people in coats knocking back wine at lunchtime thinking, yeah, I suppose it is a bit much. Yeah, and Colin Firth is just lovely, lovely human being. Hugh is incredibly smart, very funny, entertains everybody on set.
Did you ever share new college stories?
I don't think so. I mainly remember him saying, so Phillips, I'm going for my close-up. When I come back, I want you to tell me fuck, marry or kill from the crew. You have to tell me which one. That's more Hugh than I wonder who taught you German? If I tried to talk about the mound, it would have gone in an entirely different direction.
Yes, I'm sure. And what about Renee Zellweger? Because she was in, I don't know how you say it, in Method. So she was Bridget the whole way through, wasn't she? Do you do that?
No, I don't. But it does change you playing a character.
Non-stop.
It just does change you being in those relationships. So whatever you do, so if you're playing someone unpopular and frumpy, you feel pretty horrible when you go home, no matter how you try to shake it off. Yeah, she was always a pair of duty-free Toblerones, one in each hand, and speaking with a British accent. She was just a lovely person, Renee. Absolutely lovely. Really just compassionate, empathetic, very smart, lovely, lovely, lovely person. I don't know that always comes across in the press, but she is really adorable.
Was she always Bridget when you were on screen?
Well, no, she would talk a bit about home. It wasn't like she pretended not to have a life.
Oh, I thought you had to treat her as Bridget the whole way and call her Bridget.
No.
And then she would go home and she'd be Bridget.
No, that's extremely worrying when people do that. No.
No. Okay, no, that's good. That's what I thought it was.
She was in character. Some people switch in and out of the accent. So on the second one, she was more confident in the accent. She switched in and out of the accent and the character. So she knew the character better. So she could put it down during the working day.
Right.
But she was always English at night. So she was an English girl for 6 months. She went to work in a publishing house. She says no one recognised her. And she'd had this big success of Nurse Betty and Jerry Maguire.
Yes.
In the States. And she was like, if a tree falls in a forest and no one knows, am I a movie star? Everything they've been telling me in the States is bollocks because I'm here and not one person recognises me.
It's one of our bonding films as a family to watch. If things are going wrong, stick on Bridget Jones and all will be well.
Well, I feel very lucky to have been in them. I was in Notting Hill. I auditioned for the part of Hugh Grant's sister in Notting Hill and got down to the last 2 or 3 and didn't get it. And as a consolation prize, got one of the girls he dates at dinner and was then cut for being too funny and essentially distracting from...
That's a shame.
I was immensely upset about it. I'm still on some kind of DVD and deleted scenes. But it did mean that I then could do Bridget, which I wouldn't have been able to do. So I feel really, really very privileged to have been in those films, even though I probably had less screen time than Colin Firth's Christmas Jumper and slightly worse reviews.
No,
Shazza was
definitely. He was a brilliant character. In the last couple of years, you have been in several films, Off the Rails with Kelly Preston and Judi Dench and Jenny Seagrove. And Kelly at the time had breast cancer. Did you know about it at the time?
No, that was the thing. We didn't have any idea. I think it's very difficult for American actors to be open when they're ill because it negatively affects their insurance. Because you have to be insured for every job. She was so perky and up and had as much energy, if not more, than everybody else. And I just thought it was Hollywood. The things that I now realise were cancer behaviour, I thought were Hollywood behaviour. And I did her a disservice. So she arrived with 8 trunks of pills, vitamins.
Yes.
And a friend who was always administering things and massages and Reiki and things like that. And I thought, oh, this is a bit much. But
that was why.
That was that, it turns out.
Yeah.
She was probably a nurse.
Yes. Well, I watched it last night and I cried and I laughed and I cried.
It was very touching because that was the director's story.
Oh, was it?
Yes. And she directed her first movie in her 50s. She had a group of friends she went interrailing with, and then one of them died, and they took her daughter interrailing with them.
Oh, my goodness.
What could have been quite a slight story on set felt less so because we knew it was real.
Yes. Well, and then you were also in Australia, as you said at the beginning, with your boys, which is so nice. And you did How to Please a Woman, which was just so much fun. You're the starring role in it. And
thank you for watching all these things.
Oh, I've had such a nice time. I could say very importantly to people, oh, I'm off to work. That's like, what's what I'm doing? And can you just tell us about My Happy Ending, which is about to come out, I think, in the UK. It's just come out in the States.
Is it coming out in the UK? To be honest, I haven't seen it. It was a very successful play in Israel, written by Anat Gov, who was a playwright who got breast cancer and who elected not to have chemotherapy. And again, it brings up this choice question of do you have the choice to do what you want with your own life, with your own body. Andie MacDowell plays a movie star who's in London for a play that's closed prematurely due to bad box office, who finds a lump, goes for a routine scan and discovers she's stage 4. To her horror, she's gone out of town. So she's in a NHS hospital somewhere distasteful to her, like Croydon, and ends up on a ward with having her first chemo with 3 other women, each representing a way of dealing with cancer.
Yes.
Miriam Margolyes plays a spinster school teacher in her 80s who is fighting it. And she her family escaped from the Holocaust, and she's a fighter. She fights everything with everything at her disposal. And then I play Cancer is a Blessing.
Okay.
I play a former rock groupie. Yeah, my life was just all in bits, and I was estranged from my daughter, and then I got cancer and she came back. And if you think positive thoughts, it can all be good. And Raki is carry on. Just carry on as normal, just accept. And so Andie MacDowell comes into this offering of 3 different ways of doing it. She decides not to do the chemo. It was quite an intense shoot done on a shoestring, because you can imagine it's quite hard to finance a film in the UK called My Happy Ending that isn't about it.
Yeah.
I did say that to them. They thought I was being shallow, which I suppose I was.
No. Well, actually, when I read it, that was what I initially thought. I thought, oh, okay, well.
Andie MacDowell's Happy Ending. Oh, it's about cancer. Oh, a bit of a confusing series of messages. Andie plays the character very well for obvious reasons. She knows that thing inside out, not the cancer, but the being hunted as a film star and being the only L'Oreal model with grey hair.
Yes.
She's done great things for women on screen, Andie, actually.
Yes, she has.
I had the great privilege and pleasure of hanging out with Miriam Margolyes for...
Oh, who I would imagine is hilarious and lovely and...
Wonderful. She's just wonderful. And you will be unsurprised to hear that all the talks about blowjobs are really just like a business card. Then I sucked him off. That is really not at all what she's about. She's fantastically clever, a very deep thinker, huge-hearted, very compassionate human whose North Star is telling the truth. And so it's immensely refreshing to be around in our industry, as you can imagine. Because one day we had next door houses and I stumbled out the door and she went, "Are you quite all right?" And I said, "Yes, I am fine. I suppose I'm a bit tired. Oh, and I'm not wearing any makeup." She went, "Ah, yes, some people need to wear makeup. I don't, you do." And she's completely right. She's got really strong features. The secret of my success, really, you can paint whatever face you like onto my face, like no face at all, or very drab face or a more pronounced face, but it's not there to start with.
I think it's also what you're used to as well. Just what everyone gets used to seeing you with something or without something. Yeah. And then that's just the way it goes. We haven't talked about your writing and the fact that you've written several films, and I know I'm going to let you go now, but I did watch The Decoy Bride and you wrote that and it was so lovely.
I co-wrote it with a beautiful man called Neil Yaworski, who sadly died since then. That was after I'd had Ollie. I thought, gosh, I'm never going to be able to leave the house again. I'd better become a writer. Companies had been asking me to write. I mean, I wrote Smack the Pony, lots and lots and lots of that. But companies had been coming knocking, asking me to write romantic comedies. And so I thought, okay, well, rather than go to film school where I'll have to pay 30 grand to learn how to do it, I'll just learn how to do it on the job and be paid 30 grand. That seems like a better idea. So I learned like that and was astonished it got made, to be honest. That's an interesting thing. The exec for that, the first meeting, I said, okay, is this story, is this girl, she's not that attractive. And he went, can I stop you there? This is the movie. The least attractive I'm prepared to go is Kelly MacDonald. And Kelly MacDonald it was, who played the part.
She's one of my favourite actresses. She's so lovely. She's a beauty, absolute beauty.
Yeah, that's my industry. I came back to do a 20, 30 years of Women at New College open day.
Oh, did you?
Where different people spoke from different industries. And we decided collectively that film and finance were the two worst industries for women to go into because of things like that.
Well, yes, but if you love it, then you still have to go with it.
I absolutely love it. And I also have no other skills.
Well, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that.
You saw me trying to do maths earlier.
Yeah, well, you saw me trying. That's my subject. No wonder I got a third. I haven't asked you about Smack the Pony either, and I've watched so many of those, and I love those. But no, you are a true rock star of life in all ways, Sally, and you're so lovely to talk to me today, and I am really sorry that I've taken so much of your time. But
no, it's so nice to see you again.
Thank you so much, Sally, for your time today. You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to Matthew Passy and all at the Podcast Consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.